What's up everyone, Erik here and welcome to Hardware for Gamers. Today we'll be taking a look at the Corsair 4000D. The 4000D is a mid-tower ATX case. There are three sets of SKUs in the Corsair 4000 series lineup. There is the 4000D, the 4000D Airflow, and the Icue 4000X RGB. Each SKU comes in both black or white. I'll be taking a look at the white version of the 4000D Airflow. So let's take a look. Now before I get too far into this, I do buy all the products that I review myself. So if you like what I'm doing here, can you please like and share this video? It helps out the channel a lot. Speaking of helping out the channel, I also have an Amazon Associates link. So if you click on the link in the description and then add something to cart and order it, the channel will get a small kickback. Now the dimensions of the 4000D Airflow are 46.5 centimeters high by 23 centimeters wide by 45.5 centimeters deep and weighs 7.8 kilograms. The 4000D Airflow does come with a small box with all the screws and fittings in it. There is also some zip ties and some extra Velcro strips. There is also a small booklet that seems to be the user guide and/or manual, but it's really not much help. The 4000D Airflow has a metal panel on the front of the case. This panel can be easily removed by pulling the top and bottom of the panel away from the chassis. Taking a closer look at the panel, there is no dust filter on the panel, and the triangle-shaped ventilation holes on the panel are well sized, so they shouldn't restrict airflow. Now the front dust filter is still on the chassis. It is held in by magnets, so removing it to clean it is really easy. The gray surround on the front can also be easily removed by unscrewing two screws on the bottom of the case. Now the front I/O is attached to the top of the case, so there is no need to worry about damaging any of the cables by removing this. Okay, moving on to the front I/O. There is a combo port for the front audio out and microphone. There is one USB 3.0 Type A port and one USB 3.1 Type C port, as well as the reset button and the power button. There is also a large magnetic dust filter along the top of the case. Moving to the rear of the case, we see the location of the rear I/O and a 120mm pre-installed exhaust fan. There are 7 horizontal expansion slots, all with reusable covers. The 4000D Airflow also has 2 vertical expansion slots. These 2 covers are also reusable, but you will still need to buy the PCIe riser cable to actually be able to use them. And finally, at the bottom, we see the power supply location. Moving to the bottom of the case, there are 2 plastic feet at the rear, and the 2 feet at the front are a part of the gray plastic surround. Now all of these feet do have rubber pads on them to help stop the case from sliding around. There is also a removable dust filter for the power supply. This dust filter is accessed from the rear of the case, and thanks to the 30mm given for ventilation, it is very simple to remove this dust filter. Moving on to the right side panel, it is steel. And to remove the right side panel, you need to undo the 2 captive thumb screws on the rear of the case, and then locate the tabs on the back of the panel and pull the tabs away from the chassis. Then slide the panel back and lift it away. The right side panel feels pretty flimsy, but it should work well enough. Now the left side panel is tempered glass, and to remove the left side panel is similar to the right side panel. You need to undo the 2 captive thumb screws at the rear of the case, then locate the tabs on the back of the panel, and then pull the tabs away from the chassis, and then slide the panel back and lift it away. Now taking a look at the inside of the case, there is a basement, and the top of the shroud has the same triangle-shaped ventilation holes as the front and top of the case do. These ventilation holes should allow the GPU to access more air, but we'll see if that's actually the case in the testing. The shroud also has 2 large cutouts for running cables. Now the shroud does extend the entire depth of the case along the side, but along the top of the shroud there is an opening at the front to allow for 3 front fans or even a 360mm radiator. Now Corsair does sell a PSU shroud cover to cover this opening for $4 US, but again, you're gonna have to order that separately. Now taking a look at the motherboard tray, there are a number of cutouts along the top for the EPS cable and for fan connectors, but most of the cables will be running through the large covered cutout. Now in this configuration, the 4000D Airflow does support mini ITX, micro ATX, and ATX motherboards. but it is possible to move or remove the cover for the cable cutout. And by doing this, Corsair says there is support for SSICEB ATX motherboards. This cover can be easily removed by unscrewing one screw on the backside of the motherboard tray, if that is something you want. The maximum GPU length is 360 millimeters, and that is with the fan being there, but that will be cut down if you go with a front-mounted radiator. The maximum CPU cooler height in the 4000D is 170 millimeters. Okay, time to turn the case around and take a look at the backside of the motherboard tray. We see two 2.5-inch drive sleds. These drive sleds can also be placed on top of the shroud if you prefer. There is also a good number of cable tie-offs all over the backside of the motherboard tray. Corsair also provides a cable channel to help with cable management. This channel also comes with 3 Velcro straps, and there is 25 millimeters given behind the motherboard tray for cables. Corsair also sells a motherboard accessory tray that holds two 2.5-inch drives, and again, that is another $4 US. Moving on to the basement, there is a 2-bay drive cage with sleds. These sleds can hold either a 2.5-inch or a 3.5-inch drive, which means you can fit 4 2.5-inch drives in this case, or 2 3.5-inch and 2 2.5-inch. Or you can actually go buy the accessory tray thing and you can then actually have 6 2.5-inch drives. Now in its stock orientation, there is 225 millimeters given for the power supply and cables. Now the drive cage can be moved or removed. To do this, you will need to undo the 2 captive thumb screws and then slide the cage towards the right side of the case and then lift it away. To reinstall the drive cage, align the grooves on the bottom of the drive cage to the grooves on the bottom of the basement floor, then slide the drive cage in and tighten the 2 captive thumb screws. Now with the drive cage in the frontmost position, there is 265 millimeters for the power supply and cables. Now if the drive cage is in this position, a bottom intake fan at the front can still be installed, but you will no longer be able to install a 360 millimeter radiator. Now if you actually remove the drive cage completely, there will be 410 millimeters for the power supply and cables. Now that will be cut down if you put in the bottom front intake fan, and it will be cut down even more if you go with a 360 millimeter radiator. Moving on to the cooling of the 4000D airflow, this version comes with 2 120 millimeter fans pre-installed. There is 1 intake fan at the front and 1 exhaust fan at the rear. Now the 4000D airflow can support up to 6 120 millimeter fans, so that's 3 fans at the front, 2 fans along the top, with 1 fan at the rear. Now if you prefer to have 140 millimeter fans, then you can have up to 4 140 millimeter fans and 1 120 millimeter fan. So that's 2 140 millimeter fans at the front and 2 140 millimeter fans along the top, with the rear still being a 120 millimeter fan. For radiator support, you can have up to a 360 or a 280 at the front. Along the top, you can have up to a 280 or a 240, or at the rear, you can have a 120 millimeter. Now, Corsair does specify that the 280 millimeter radiator will fit if you have Corsair LPX memory. Now that would be the then standard or low profile memory. So if you do have LEDs or tall heat spreaders on your RAM, the 280 millimeter rad may not actually clear your DIMMs. Just something to keep in mind. Okay, that's the overview. Now I do have a quick build montage thing, so time to roll that. Okay, time to go over all the testing. But before I get into the case temperature charts, if you do have any questions about how I test the cases, check out my case testing method video in the card above. I'll also link it in the description, and that should answer most of your questions on how I test the cases. Starting with the CPU testing, with the 2 pre-installed fans, the 4000D airflow had the max CPU temperature reach 57°C. By adding a top exhaust fan, brought the max CPU temperature to 55.3 Celsius. In the fan analyze test, the max CPU temperature dropped to 53.4 Celsius. Now when using the two stock fans and adding a top exhaust and a top front intake, had the max CPU temperature at 52.7 Celsius, which indicates that the stock fans perform better than the P12s that I use in my fan normalized tests. At least in this case they do. Now when I removed the front panel and dust filters in the fan normalized test, the maximum CPU temperature hit 52 Celsius, which indicates that the front panel and dust filters are not restricting the airflow to the CPU in any meaningful way. Now when comparing the stock CPU temperature of the 4000D airflow to the other cases I've tested, it lands pretty much right in the middle of the list. And when comparing the CPU temperature in the fan normalized testing, the 4000D airflow again performed pretty well. Moving on to the GPU temperature, and this is where things get interesting. When the 4000D airflow is in its stock configuration, it had a max GPU temperature of only 56.5 Celsius. Now in the fan normalized test and the test with the stock fans with the additional exhaust fan along the top had the same max GPU temperature of 54.4 Celsius. Now when using the two stock fans and adding a top exhaust and a top front intake, the max GPU temperature was 53.1 Celsius. Then when I removed the front panel and dust filters with the normalized fans, the max GPU temperature dropped to 51.2 Celsius, which does indicate that the front panel and dust filters are restricting the airflow to the GPU just slightly. Now when comparing the GPU temperatures of the 4000D airflow to the other cases I've tested, its stock configuration performed very well, which actually has it as the new chart topper, and I retested this twice, so yes it is. And in the fan normalized test, it performed well, landing third from the top. So what do I think of the Corsair 4000D airflow? The build quality is really good. The case can hold up to 4 drives in this configuration, and if you want to spend the extra $4, you can have it actually go up to 6 drives. The triangle-shaped ventilation holes do give this case a very distinct look, which I do actually personally like. I also like that Corsair gives the color options, so that you can actually choose between the black or the white. Now the cable management was a little odd, and that's because of the cable channels. The channel is raised up off the motherboard tray, which then decreases the amount of room between the top of the channel and the side panel. And when using cable extensions, I found that I needed to actually create a second run of cables to actually get the side panel to fit correctly. I also don't really like the cutout cover, at least in the stock location I don't. It pushes on the cables a little bit. It actually pushes on them a little bit more than I'm comfortable with. I much prefer the cover in the front position where it still kind of covers a bit of the cutout, but leaves the cables a little bit more space. Now in the temperature testing, the 4000D airflow did do pretty well in its stock configuration, but based off my tests, it is definitely worth adding the additional fans to make sure that the CPU temperatures are kept in check. Well, that's all I got for this one. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you're still watching, please hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you get notified whenever you drop a new video. And you should probably check out these videos. If you like this one, you'll probably like those ones too. Also follow me on Twitter at HFG_YT. I also have a Discord server. The link is in the description below. And as always, thank you for watching and see you next time.